even someone who would be a good customer for you, it's actually pretty rare that they're going to be ready to buy just on the first impression with you.
The first 15 seconds of your ad kind of determine your funnel's fate.
I've also had campaigns where the same ad was just as effective for like years. Find the winners and look after them.
You've just landed on Unfair Advantage, the show for lean teams who want to scale without the bloat, the burnout, or the BS.
Each week, we go live with founders, marketers, and operators solving the hard stuff. AI workflows, scrappy go-to-market plays, and ideas your team will actually want to get across.
While your competitors are still figuring it out, you're getting the unfair advantage. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Unfair Advantage. We're the show for lean teams who want to grow without burning out. And today's show is all about paid ads. If you're running paid ads, you already know they're more and more expensive and less effective unless you're doing it right. But what if the real problem isn't the platform or your budget? What if it's the first 15 seconds of your funnel? So our guest today is Tom Davenport. He's the founder of Times 100, the growth agency behind campaigns for everything from box office films to boutique apartment brands. His agency has also just won the Campaign of the Year award in the European paid media section. So he's helped to scale indie productions to national audiences, grown travel brands from zero to booked out, and more recently, he's working on campaigns where a single cold ad drove 30 million impressions using just 3 creatives. So I'm really keen to dig into this. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Pleased to be here.
It's good to see you. Just for background, me and Tom go back quite a long way, actually. We used to go to university together and haunt the streets of Huddersfield, which was quite an interesting time. We actually both did a completely adjacent degree as well in music. So it's good to see that someone else also did what I did and left music and found their kind of calling in this space. So yeah, Tom, great to have you here. And I suppose let's start with, before we've kind of spoke about funnels and, you know, that most funnels break before the retargeting even begins, and kind of how do you see that playing out? Like what's your main message behind that, I suppose?
I think the headline takeaway is a lot of spend will go on acquiring attention and reaching new people. And then people are pretty well versed now with retargeting. But there is a big chasm. A lot of people will, at the very least, know to retarget, say, website visitors or maybe, you know, some stage of abandonment. But I think people overlook retargeting engagement, or in particular, and I'm going to express a bit more about the difference and benefits of different types of engagement, but between engagement audiences and video view audiences. Not all video view audiences. I'm going to set a nice threshold that you can think about. And so, for example, if you ran a bunch of cold ad spend, which is very often the more expensive part of the funnel, because you're reaching many more people. If you only retargeted people who had, you know, been on some mid-funnel part of your website, well, what about people who'd been on the homepage, or indeed had actually clicked through to your page in, say, Meta or Instagram, or stuck around and watched some video? Now, you'd think, well, hang on, they're just checking out, that we need to focus on the people who are taking an interest and they're actually exploring the site. Yes, you absolutely should. I'm definitely not saying that shouldn't come first. But what puzzles me is why people might take that angle, but then carry on spending on an even colder audience, i.e. completely cold. So the chasm is that those people who are showing even a fleeting interest and some kind of active engagement in your brand, even if they haven't gone and done what you were hoping they would do, you know, on at least exploring a site or signing up, is actually a really valuable audience, because that should be the bit that you start working. And you want to keep bringing in people from that cold world, but if someone has stopped scrolling and paid some attention, there's something you can work with there. And I think embracing that, and also, you know, as I'll talk about some of the economics of that, it can be very productive. And I think this simple insight has, helped us be a lot more cost effective in our spends.
It sounds like a lot of the time with the first ad, most brands will try and say everything that they do in one go. But you just kind of need to peel back the layers and just get their interest. So what would that first ad's goal be then, Tom?
Well, I want to be clear when I explain this that it's fine to somewhat sell what you do. I'm not saying you don't have links to your product, okay? But the most important thing is that if you've taken the time to do the best targeting you can, and there's a couple of things, let me know when, but I can help visualize some of this. Some people might like to go broad. I don't want to argue about that, but let's just say rather than go fully broad to an entire nation, you do some targeting, you try and narrow down to the kind of demographics or traits that you think are appropriate. But that's never going to be 100% hit rate, of course. And we all know that. And we get, probably people would be used to say single digit click-through rate. So of course it's like 90 something percent that is not interested, and that's fine and normal. So how do you get that audience to kind of signal and say, hey, I am actually somewhat in the market for this, I'm just not buying now? And that's where the wealth of engagement signals, and I'm going to talk in meta terms, a lot of this transposes to other networks, and I can pick out a couple of particularly interesting differences. TikTok and YouTube might be nice examples, but meta is really good because it's very, very full funnel, very liquid markets, very cost effective, and lots of control over managing these audiences. So if you've defined good targeting, you need to set the premise and get them to reveal themselves, because even someone who would be a good customer for you, like it's actually pretty rare that they're going to be ready to buy just on the first impression with you. So actually, if you think about the way attention works, and the way people work, and remember, people are not updating as fast as the ad platforms or technology. This is evolved over a long time. So really the consistent thing that you can work with is thinking about how to interface with actually a bigger part of the wider marketing machine. If the technology and the screens is obviously a huge part of that infrastructure and an affordable one to deliver through, well, the other part of the machine is the compute that is happening in the audience's heads. And so even someone who could be a really good customer for you, they might be like, that looks cool, I'll do that later when I'm off the bus or off the toilet. Okay, no, you're not going to see data on this, but I mean, how much scrolling social media is there? They might be like, okay, that's cool, but they're not gonna actually go through a whole checkout right now or fill in the form. They'll be like, okay, that looks cool. So what do you do with that glimmer of interest, which has essentially been the audience kind of putting their hand up and saying, yeah, I am in the market for this? And the important distinction is, if they're not in the market for it, they're going to scroll past, and that's fine. Maybe a different cold ad will pull them in. But if you do get one of those signals, even if it's a faint signal, that's actually something really valuable to work with. And a really important component of this is that the economics really work in your favor, because I'm going to talk more about different types of engagement, but my favorite, and the one people should aspire to put in place, is to use video at the cold end. And we're not going to use 3-second audiences, because that's just, for me, actually a lot too short. Okay, you could look for 3 seconds and on the fourth be scrolling on. But the 10-second video audience, or a through view, which is typically 15-second, or if it's shorter than 15-second video, it's a full view. Okay. That means they've really stopped and stared. Now, a lot of people might actually watch more than the 10 seconds, but I think if you stopped for 10 seconds, then something has captured you. And so your question is about the premise and setting the tone. It's really important that first contact, and remember, if this is a cold audience and you are excluding all warm audiences below, we'll come on to how we can deal with those. But if you're excluding all warm audiences, then this audience has not interacted with you at all. Maybe they've scrolled past something in the past, but let's just say this is essentially their first touch with you. And so if you're able to get them to stop and pay some attention when our attention is so fleeting, and there are so many attention-grabbing things one swipe away, then that's something to work with. And what happens is a lot of people that do go and retarget don't actually build and update and maintain the video view audiences. And it's a faff. You have to click through every individual one on Instagram and Facebook, and it takes time. And if you have a video go viral yesterday, if you don't go and click that audience update, then they are not filtering straight through to the retargeting. But if you can put that in place and you set the premise right, then great. But if that first 10 seconds is not spelling out who this is for, or at least there's something relatable, then even the right people might not catch the attention, or you might be going too hard sell too soon. Okay. So just so the takeaway is recognize that this is the first touch point someone has with you, and give them something that they can recognize and give them some context, so that introduction. I mean, if you're at a networking event and you just start talking about what you did yesterday, be like, okay, who are you? But maybe just a moment of small talk and be like, oh, hey, yeah, I work in advertising, and yeah, it sounds like you're that you're in a space that actually works with that. Maybe you're a provider or something. And be like, oh, okay, yeah, cool, yeah, tell me more about you. But if you don't have that little introduction, you're kind of missing a trick.
Yeah. Because we're deep in this with our own products as well, it's something that intrigues me even more. So let's say you've scoped out this 10-second watch rate, and equally you're then looking at getting all the audience set up. You've done that all in Meta. What's the creative you go with next? Like, how do you re-engage? Do you go with similar, or do you go with more of an educational flow? Like, how do you take that?
So I could give some examples. I think what I'll do, but I'll tell you an example of how we do this in film, just because it's the one we won the award for in the European Paid Media Awards that you mentioned, Melody. And I have some screenshots in a moment that might help illustrate how this can be applied in some quite different contexts. So if there is a film, perfect cold ad, I'm going to keep it real straightforward, but perfect cold ad is the trailer for the film, okay? Now, you're going to target relevant audiences. We do a lot of entertainment films, so there will be large, warm retargeting audiences for the artist, or maybe for another brand. We might do stuff in kids' movies and stuff. But they're cold to this project, so we treat them as cold, even though they're technically a retargeting audience, okay? And the reason I said, we could still do cold interest, but some of these artists have warm audiences larger than some countries. But for this project, they're cold, so theory still applies. So the first touch point is the trailer, okay? And the trailer is like, if they're not going to watch the trailer, they are not going to go and watch the movie, okay? But if they're like, okay, what's this? And they're watching it, and the trailer is inherently an introduction to be like, here's something happening. And I wish I had examples, and I'm not going to name names, but there was, let's say, a large pop act, and the first 10 seconds really spelled out that this is like a one chance to see this amazing tour. And it basically kind of said everything. Like, if you watch the rest of the trailer, yeah, there's loads of glitz and glamour, but the first 10 seconds pretty much told you what the hell is about to happen that you didn't know about before. And then there was another comparable project where it was all quite mysterious and it looked very cool and arty. And I know the kind of rooms that everyone would be like, this is amazing. But I tell you what, like, the first 10 to 15 seconds did not spell that out. So even people that might have been receptive to, oh my God, I've got a chance to go and see this in cinemas, and they might even love the artist, but you just have this drop-off rate. Anyone who looks at retention on video, it just goes like that, right? And so you want the highest peak of people possible to at least have some takeaway, because even if they abandon at that 10 or 15 second threshold, you know that is a premise and context you can work with. Okay, it's like if you told a joke, but you said the punchline and you didn't say the bit before, then if the premise isn't there, it kind of doesn't work. The premise is a foundation that everything else is built around. It sets it defines the assumptions that we're going to work with. So in that case, trailer, perfect cold video. If you watch 10 or 15 seconds or more, a lot of people will watch more, then you start seeing the next bits. Now, that's not just one ad. You could have different trailers. You could have one trailer and a different opening 5 seconds. And then you will find one that has the best throughput. And you're talking a penny or two per engagement, per through view. If that, actually, some stuff that's really engaging and maybe has an audience that has some recognition already. Could be at fractions of a penny, okay? And I'll actually give you an example of one soon. So anyone who's gone through that 10-second or 15-second through view hoop, we know that they know there is a film going on, And that's where you can either go simple two-step funnel straight to the call to action ads. Hey, buy the ticket, it's near you here, blah, blah, blah. But you can also do engagement stuff where there's behind the scenes things. So like interview with director, or a certain clip or two that shows a particular angle to the film, or, things that make sense if you know there's a film. But if you went in with them to the cold audience, it's like you'd have to put two and two together to
Right.
sort of understand what's going on. Now, okay, let's touch on that for a tech audience. I might have an example of this in a moment, but relatable problem, okay, and how someone else has solved it, okay? If you went in with that and you weren't even talking about your product, then at least people who have that problem might be like, oh my God, I have that problem. So they might click through to the blog article that you've linked to, or it might be like, it might be a video that explains that. And no one is going to engage with that unless they have that problem. In fact, it's going to be boring as hell to anyone who doesn't relate to that problem. Okay. And that's really good, because that means your warm audience that's accrued from those engagement signals is people going, yeah, I'm not only in the targeting that you've defined, but I also actually stuck around to hear about this problem that bores everyone else, but actually it's something that I have. So it might not be ready to buy, but you are now starting to accrue an audience that does resonate with this somehow. And that's why it's really important that you think about the different ways you might introduce this problem. And there could be a lot of ways to spin that, but exploring that and finding something strong is critical, because when you find that message, or maybe that particular creative, you can use that for a long time. Because remember, this is only going to, you can break this rule, come on to that maybe, but this is fundamentally, it's only going to new people who haven't seen you, okay? It doesn't get old in 3 months, unless you're saying Happy Halloween in there or something. Because it's only going to new people, okay? And unless you've completely saturated your market, then you can kind of keep using that, okay? You don't have to do new creative for the sake of it. You're doing the new creative to find the message that works. And when you do find one or two that works, then you might spin that into different formats, different placements, and so on. So yeah, introduction is key, and routing people forward that pay attention to that introduction is kind of one of the big secrets, I think, that people overlook.
Yeah, definitely. Starting with a problem is something we do a lot in messaging in general, especially when we're marketing to SaaS. It's so key, and experimenting with the right problem message. What problems are resonating more? Oftentimes, we talk about the hair on fire problems of a prospect, or of an ideal customer. Sometimes we think it's something, and then it can be another. So, yeah, just running experiments on that. Tom, you mentioned that you need kind of a two-step funnel to see if the product market fit is real. Could you break that down for us in terms of the ad layers?
Yeah. Now, when I say two-step funnel, this is like minimum viable funnel, okay? Now, I know there'll be lots of people who say, hey, I get loads of results from cold ads. That's great, by the way. But remember, for all the conversions you get, there will also be, if you did a flow chart of potential outcomes, you've got, yes, people who are converting. Okay, great. Good for you. And that's wonderful. Scale, sure. Then you've got people who potentially would buy, but maybe not right now because life is busy, or I'm walking home and I'm just scrolling my phone, or whatever it is. And then you've got people who just don't care at all. So that cold ad, it's like, okay, what are you doing to loop back on the ones that are interested but just didn't buy then? Okay. So two-step is capture audience. Second step is convert audience. Real simple. And I think it can work without necessarily doing any sales at all at the cold end. Okay. In fact, you can get more scale there, because it can be that it's not even salesy, which itself can be something that can potentially put off a segment of that audience. So cold ad, ideally video, but it can be content, and I can show you examples.
And video, because I just want to dig into that a little bit. You mentioned video. Is that because you can just get more engagement metrics from them?
It's because delivery is so much cheaper, okay? Or the cost per result. Imagine this. There is a bar that you want the audience to pass in order to say, yeah, like there's a strong enough signal that they're actually a good prospect to continue marketing to, okay? And I don't think a 3-second view is that bar. Okay. It's just not enough. Okay. You will have a lot more that you could retarget, but I don't include those in the warm audiences because the quality will increase the longer they actually stuck around, which is why I like the 10 or 15 seconds. So we're talking penny or two per engagement there. Now, the same approach works with any other kind of engagement. You can just say, hey, anyone who engages in, and by the way, I should just flag, Meta has actually just changed some of the definitions around some of its campaign types and what it will optimize for. So it's basically pulling out video engagement from the standard engagement campaigns. That's fine. That'll be solvable. I don't want to get into the nuance of it. I haven't even necessarily built one myself yet. This is just in the last few days. It will still be possible to do the same approach, but video is just cheaper. If you didn't have video, you could do the same thinking and optimize on cold for engagement. And for you, like, this is the kind of thing loads of advertisers will be like, it's trash, it's useless. Yeah, it's because they're not actually routing forward all those engagements to do something next. Okay. So if an engagement costs something like 5 or 10 pence per engagement potentially, well, you could have had a lot more people pass that bar for a penny or two. Okay, so it's just you just get a higher throughput at a lower cost by using video, in my experience. Okay, now again, all these rules can break because there are campaigns where it's not been video and it's just been engagement and it's been fractions of a penny. And I think Dynamo is a good example that always comes to mind for me for that, which I think I've got some screenshots for. If you get sales on cold, great, but yeah, step one, so 2-step funnel. Okay, something to get the right people to reveal themselves. And then if there's a lot of layers you could add. Okay, you could expand the rules that I've talked about. You could think about this in the same terms for people who've been on the homepage but nowhere else, or been on product page and nowhere else. And I think that understanding is more common with people. But the 2-step funnel would be capture people and then hit them with the sales ad straight after that. So I've watched half of your video explaining something, going, okay, cool. And then I'm immediately in the running for, sign up now for this free thing, or maybe even trying to push for a purchase. And it means that people are perpetually only moving to the sale ad if they've kind of revealed their interest. Now, I'm not saying you don't try out your sales ad to cold. That's absolutely fine. Okay, it might stick, but it's almost like the cold approach I'm describing is almost a way of acquiring your real audience, and then that's the audience that you would go and work with, rather than hope that the cold targeting on LinkedIn or Facebook is gonna crack it. I mean, look, it's very good. A lot of people thrive with this, but a minimum viable funnel is kind of like that. And I'll tell you where this came from. It's about 10 years ago. There was this very local strategy I think it was the digital marketer groups, and they were just like, hey, like, if you're in a town, you don't have a lot of scale, you just need people to reveal themselves. You can just go radius around Swindon or whatever. Hey, I'm a plumber and I do this, blah, blah, blah. And like, a load of people will ignore it. And then some people will watch and stick around with that. And then you've captured the audience of people in Swindon who are receptive to this plumber, because you're either like, okay, that looks good, or I need that sort of thing, or that's boring, I'm scrolling past it. So you have that warm audience in a bucket. We could come on to retention strategies. If you don't engage for a year, you fall off that list. And that gets very interesting when you're working with companies.
At that first layer, it sounds like it's a bit different than the brand awareness, because a lot of times you'll hear people layering, and first we want to create and build brand awareness and then go into what we do. But it's almost like with Meta and platforms where you can't do super specific targeting. You need to just go based on interest and other factors. Is that what you're saying?
I think it is kind of a brand awareness thing. I think the word that I think a lot about, and that I actually think is quite under researched, is recognition. If you try and look at academic literature on the science of recognition, like, it's overloaded with different meanings of recognition, like giving people a pat on the back at work and so on. Example I always give is this: if you saw the McDonald's logo, you cannot choose not to know that it's McDonald's. Like, that's not a conscious thing that you can control at all. Okay, now obviously McDonald's has spent maybe more than anyone ever on building that recognition, but there's a takeaway there, which is that there is some wiring in pretty much all our brains, where when that shape of two arches is there, it just literally goes straight to McDonald's. Like there is, and maybe all these other associations like taste and fun and so on. And you cannot choose and control that. So now we're not McDonald's. You'd be like, okay, what's the relevance? Well, your cold audience has zero recognition. Okay, so how can you start creating that pathway? And seeing and recognizing a problem is one way to start getting there. And then in the retargeting, they can start understanding. In fact, I told you the two-step funnel is a nice minimum viable approach, because if you're on low spend, you can go, great, I'm going to have an engagement or video view campaign. I'm going to try a handful of creatives in there, do my best targeting I can, but I'm also just going to optimize for those engagements. I'm not going to optimize for the sale. I'm actually going to optimize for people who go, that's interesting. And then I'm going to optimize for conversion, maybe traffic, but ideally for conversion for that retargeting. That's a minimum viable funnel. There is usually, my preference is actually, there's a third piece, and it's not a sequential thing. It's actually in parallel to that second step, which is engagement campaign. Again, it goes to all warm audience. It's not trying to sell. And actually very often you can actually just fill this by adding your page posts to that bucket, because you're not having to do any extra creative. You're literally just going, right, I've already got stuff that is talking about what we do, and maybe, I don't know, just the many shades of content that one might put on their company page. And you just take that post ID, drop it in there, low spend, okay, it might only be £5 a day. And it will then just distribute your page post to people that have interacted with you. They don't follow you, but why is that useful? Because they're now starting to see you in many placements across their feed at very low cost. Again, we're talking penny or two per engagement. And by the way, that's a retention strategy, because if they engage with you, that resubscribes them for a year to that warm list. And you're not feeling salesy, okay? People think high frequency can be bad. High frequency is great, provided it's different, diverse, visual, creative. And you start looking like the biggest thing in the world, okay? Particularly amazing results in entertainment with this. It looks like, oh my God, I'm seeing this band everywhere, and they're not getting snowblind to the same single creative. The other nice thing is, if they interact, then that can trigger the call to action bit. Because if you do sales ads constantly, it can, maybe they're not ready for it, but you can automate this, because if they've engaged somehow in the last 3 or 7 days, then maybe they see the call to action bit then. And if they don't buy and move forward to your mailing list or some other audience, then their inaction automatically can just regress them back to that engagement campaign. And they might see you around, they might not interact, but when they do, back on the conveyor belt to the call to action. So the audience's own behavior, all the steps I'm describing here, the audience's own behavior determines what they're going to see next. Okay. Cold, if they're interested, they move in and they have engaged, so they might see a call to action. If they're not interested in call to action, they see engagement. If they engage with that again, they go back to call to action. So this works at a very small scale, even in the town example I gave, all the way up to the biggest audiences, maybe some of the biggest audiences in the world. I've worked with ones that are in the hundreds of millions, and the same small stack of campaigns can actually manage that delivery.
So when we talk the creative side there, it feels like nowadays you have to just do so much on the creative. Do you really need like the massive creatives, or like what's your experience on that?
So creative exploration is really important. This will be a controversial take. Like, there's some big and really, very credible and very successful advertisers who will say it's the single biggest lever, and like it is in a sense, but lots of creative is expensive. There are cases when you don't have to do something new for the sake of it. I think people are stuck in the habit of thinking that something has to be fresh. But I gave the example that for the cold audiences, actually, it doesn't necessarily have to be fresh, because it's fresh to the, something that was great 6 months ago is still the first time that cold audience might be seeing it today. I think the main thing is that, like, you need to do whatever exploration necessary to find what connects with the market and what gets them to reveal themselves. And it is good and healthy to introduce new competition. It's like normal evolution.
So it's more of like a messaging pairing. So how we message and making sure that the ICP or whoever we're trying to push to actually resonates with it, rather than what it looks like. It's more what it's talking in tonally, and
yeah. Like, I suppose my position is, I don't want to say that creative testing isn't important. Okay, there's even if you crack the funnel, there's probably still more you could find. Okay, great. But a lot of people, for a lot of people, creative is the expensive bit of this whole operation. And those successful advertisers who think that creative is kind of the be and end all, and in fact believe that the creative is a big part of how the platform knows who to deliver to, which is true, but they seem to think that's new in the last few years, and it's actually the case since probably 2016 anyway. If you had a coffee cup in an ad, like, in principle, it's going to go to lean slightly more to people who've engaged with other stuff with coffee in, and that's been the case for a long time. Facebook's own documentation said the same in 2016. So it is important, but I've also had campaigns where the same ad was just as effective for like years. Okay, at the cold end.
Yeah, I suppose it makes complete sense now when you're talking about the cold end. It's the first time they see it, so why keep it fresh and changing when they're not going to? It makes no sense for that person to keep on changing the narrative, because it's still the first time. Whereas people coming back, that's where the freshness counts. Because and
that's why I like boosting page posts, by the way, because you're inherently creating new content there. Of course, look, I think call to action and the sales, the end of this, you're going to be wanting to dial it in. But again, if you found phrasing that works, it's like, you might have almost found it and you might have pushed into the wall. And look, if you do find something that works, it's absolutely fine and very good to be. I can show you, actually. I've got one of my favorite ever example.
Shall we look at some examples, Tom, as you're talking? It'd be really helpful to illustrate.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's click share.
I think the message here is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can still build around, but if something isn't broke, then maybe make the most of that particular bit.
If this episode's hitting for you, go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps more lean teams find their edge, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.
All right. So I'll quick fire some stuff that I've discussed. First of all, I think it's fundamentally important that people break down the stages, the behaviors, the individual atoms of behavior that one goes through before they do the conversion you want. Okay. And then to think about how, if someone abandons a behavior at any step, that you can kind of boomerang them back. Okay, so your cold audience is an unrealized customer, and this is example for a, let's say, fictional media brand. Let's say it was a tech brand or something. So in order to be a mega fan, and this applies to pretty much, I think, anything in B2C, I'd say, probably apply to B2B. Obviously, it's different scale. So very much a B2C marketer most of the time, though attention is universal. Okay. So in order to be a purchaser or a subscriber, you don't just wake up one morning and go, I'm going to subscribe to this thing. No, you have to actually hear about the thing and interact. And then you probably don't just go on the homepage and buy immediately. You might, at the very least, click the pricing page, or you might come back and reflect on it later, and you might subscribe to something. And look, you might also come into the site and jump all the way forward. Fine. Okay. But breaking those down is really good, because it's context. Okay. You can retarget off of any of these, knowing what their current context and the premise that they're caught up to is. Okay. So that's, I think, just the first thing is useful to do, is break down the minimum chain of behaviors that one would go through in order to get to the end state that you want, which is paying. Okay. And if we agree that there's a lot of people in the world, okay, the whole population, but let's not advertise to all them. Lots of wasted ad spend. Let's do the best bet we can on what that targeting is. But even people that would potentially buy, okay, they're a potential customer, but maybe not today or maybe not tomorrow. But if they are revealing themselves, then we do want to capture them in that kind of warm bucket. And I've also mentioned that, of course, people regress over time. I'm not going to get too much more into that, but there are there are ways you can deal with that. Okay, if someone's approaching the end of 12 months, there's interesting ways you can actually isolate those and boost, push engagements at them. But anyway, that's for another day. So if cold where they've never interacted, or certainly not in the last year, which probably means they've forgotten about you anyway. Okay, they might have interacted 3 years ago, but if they haven't heard of you, you're clearly not top of mind. Okay, and then what would be some engagement? For on-platform engagement within an ad platform, it's typically 12 months, or a web engagement is actually about 6 months or 180 days. And then typically, and I know cold, warm, hot is sort of common terminology. One can segment this a lot, but it would be confusing to talk about here. So I just use these 3 layers. Hot would be something where you're like, yeah, they're in the position that I would actually say, hey, do you want to buy the thing? So they might be a subscriber, or they might be engaging way more than others, for example. So you've got this chain of behaviors, and then there is something that the ad campaign can kind of pair to. And so that campaign stack, like, I've run many campaigns, but I only had 3 or 4 campaigns. And it becomes a bucket that new content can drop into, and the rules are just done. Okay, you do need to go and update audiences. You do typically need to think about what kind of creative might go in, and you also might pause and turn off things that have run their course. Okay, there are cases where, I've talked about ads that can last a long time, but there are also cases where, for example, in that engagement campaign where you're dropping in page posts, we actually put a frequency cap. It might be a frequency cap of 3 or 4, where whatever is most engaging is going to get the most delivery. It's going to go to lots of people, and that's great, but you don't want that to be the only thing your warm audience starts seeing. So when it hits that frequency cap, it will turn off, and the next best thing will fall into line. Okay, again, just love a sort of self-organizing ad delivery system. So yeah, essentially it means you've got, right, cold audience, let's get them to introduce, it'd be interest and lookalikes, whatever you like, all the usual stuff that people would be used to. And it may be traffic, and they may accelerate all the way through to purchase. Lovely job. Okay, you can go and see those, cost per conversions on that campaign. But there is another path people ignore, which is where they've interacted and they've engaged, but they've not necessarily even been on the site. Okay. And of course, there's a third audience that didn't engage and scroll past, and they're not your people. They might still be in the cold targeting for something else to catch them, or maybe the same thing gets them at a better time. But this is the branch that I think a lot of people overlook. And then they're in the warm audience because you know that they have some recognition at minimum. Okay. Also, website visitors would be in that warm audience. And of course, cold paid media is not the only way that people can acquire to that audience. Your organic social to some extent, search engine traffic. Okay, and so there's other things that can get people to get over there. All right, but cold campaigns are great. It's like a tap to say, right, how many people do we want in here? And if you're talking penny or 2 per engagement, then actually the cost to get 100,000 people into that warm audience as an audience to start working with and massaging over the next 3 or whatever months is actually not that extraordinary. Okay, we're talking low thousands to actually go and acquire your real marketing audience, and then to go and reach that real marketing audience with only, the delivery costs. If you're talking, say, £3-4 per 1,000 people reached, it's actually not that hard to go and hit 70-80% of that warm audience with every new message you have, or each new campaign, each new webinar. Okay, so suddenly your costs and the economics start getting really interesting. So I can give you a couple of creative. It doesn't matter what the flow is in your website. I think it's always worth breaking out and thinking about. I can give you some examples of a few favorites, or at least ones I had access to. Any questions before I get into that? I just want to make sure that the funnel mindset is clear, even though I feel like funnel's a very loaded word, but it's the one we're used to.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the bit equally around engagement where it doesn't go to your website, as someone who's founded a lot of things, it's also something that doesn't necessarily resonate when at first view, right? It's like, well, of course, like if they haven't clicked through, they, like, for you at first time thinking, you're like, well, surely they're not the person. But then as soon as you explain the whole 10-second that there's something there, it just needs to be converted and treated better, then yeah, it makes absolute sense. And I'm just now thinking of our own stuff that I want to dig into deeper there, and how we can kind of engage more in that layer.
A question on retargeting though, like how many creatives do you need? Really, like how many times can someone see the same creative?
I think frequency is important to pay attention to per creative, but not overall, because if you have different things retargeting at people. Like, as long as it's, there's some sort of diversity maybe in messaging or visuals. Like, if it's all very close, then it almost may as well feel like the same thing. So I don't think you could say, well, the right number is this. I mean, frequency wise, you're playing it pretty safe if you're like, up to maybe 4 frequency. I think high frequency is okay, but if you have different kinds of messaging, and it's not all hard sell, then I actually don't think high frequency is a big deal. And they'd also, you can manage the delivery. This is why I talked about on the call to action bit, that you can think about windows where it might only be the last 3 or 7 or 30 days that someone might see the salesy content, but then they're free of it if they don't engage in that period. I think the catch is, I just want to be clear that if you're a higher spending advertiser, it's quite easy to do a 3-day or even 1-day window on that call to action, where the moment they express interest in anything else you've done, be it an ad or in fact Googling your website, then they're in the running to see the call to action. But that kind of requires relatively large warm audiences, because a 1-day audience, even if you had hundreds of thousands in there, that 1-day audience might be quite small and they might get absolutely hammered in that day.
Just when you say a large audience, because obviously it's a bit kind of subjective, what would you consider a large audience versus a small, in like figures, I suppose, just so it's a bit easier to take home?
Yeah, good question. So in retargeting terms, like, let's say if I wanted to do one of these windows on the call to action ad, where it's not just permanently going to run a sales ad at you, you're going to be free of it after X days, then I need to make sure, I can't do a 3-day window if there's only 200 people in that audience or something, because it's like,
you'll burn through.
I mean, first of all, like, how many of those 100 people are even going to necessarily log in that day? So you don't actually have 100. I think hundreds is actually a really low example, but if it was in the low thousands, they're not all even necessarily opening the app on that day, and they're going to be absolutely obliterated with it. And in fact, the delivery costs will be high because there's because there's a lower available inventory than if you're kind of auto bidding, which is the default. Then it might start costing 20 pence per engagement or something, and so you almost might as well not do a 3-day window. Okay, I think the steer on all this is what's getting you a cost per result or a cost per throughput to the next stage that is acceptable. Okay, and I always like to see some kind of engagement content in the low pennies, and video pretty much always is going to be down there, at a penny or two. Large audience. The thing is, you could have a large overall warm audience, but it depends how you slice it up. So this is why my recommendation is that people learning about this might want to just think at least in terms of a 2-step funnel, and then you might expand it or create layers based on the user journey that I pointed out, because that there's people that need to collect and don't know you, and then that your call to action, which you're welcome to go and run cold campaigns, cold audiences too, but the call to action is going to people who have at least shown some glimmer of interest. So that's kind of a nice sweet spot. And you want to imagine it as kind of, there's a bit of a seesaw where on day 1, and you've never run ads before, there's no point running cold spend because warm spend, because there is no warm audience. So it's 100% cold. But then on day 2, you might now have people starting to flow through, or certainly within a few days, you might have a warm audience large enough to start bothering. So it starts tipping a little bit. Okay. So shall I zoom into a couple of these just to maybe...
Yeah, I think it'd be good. Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to start with my all-time favorite, and I think there's probably a case for this being one of the most successful ads on Meta. I don't want to say of all time, but I think I think for its period and its era, you can see the design. I think it was, and in fact, this screenshot was taken very early. Okay, the numbers went nuts on this, and this was an ad that literally lasted years. Okay, and many others forked off from it. Flashpack, as a result of all this, was, I think, the fastest growing business in the UK in something like 2017. It was a team of 3 when I started with them, grew to 13 million revenue inside 2 years. And when it was a team of 60, we coached their newly acquired ad team and had to move on. But very, great win all around. Okay, so this is not selling a holiday. Okay, they had a target audience of people who were single in their 30s and 40s. Okay, the kind of people who wanted a backpack style adventure, but not to slum it at night and actually stay somewhere nice. Genius marketing, by the way. Okay, ad systems alone don't solve everything. There has to be a proposition that an actual market will want in the world, and obviously, okay, that's the job of a business and the job of innovation. But let's just say, okay, that's the one we've got. Let's say someone has a product market fit, but we still need to connect with the market. Okay, here's what it says. I was single in my 30s, completely tired of my job and desperate for a holiday, dot, dot, dot. Have a read if you want to hear how Flashpack began. If you are in that audience and you are feeling those feelings, how could you not want to have a peek at what the hell this lady did to break free of that rut? This is not a video. This is a blog. We are targeting people who are single, aged 30 to 50, or certainly 35 to 45 because of the way the age barriers work on the platform. So we're targeting the right age range. We might be zooming in on metropolitan cities and so on, where there's the affluence for this sort of thing. You don't get 100% of people click through, okay? But from that demographic, and they've read this and they relate to being tired of their job and desperate for a getaway, then suddenly anyone who clicks through to the blog article is actually a really, really good prime audience that is not going to go and drop 3,000 or 4,000 on a holiday today necessarily, but they are people that we want to go and build that brand recognition with, okay? And we spent a lot on this ad and its variants over time. But I just want to point out it wasn't the only bucket. We did the same for men. They're actually partners. They're the founders of the company, by the way. And look, there's other ways you can introduce, okay? This is an introduction. We're a new and innovative breed of travel company. I don't know how well that particular, I know it's one of the better ones at the time, but you see what I mean? Like this was absolute gold. And I think it's just, it was explosive and transformative. And by the way, actually, Facebook used Flashpack's campaign structure as a case study in the newspapers by 2017-18. But the point is that this is an introduction. There is the premise, and in fact, even swiping through that is enough to mark you as an engager and route you forward. Okay.
I find it really cool how in B2C that you're segmenting by men and women a lot of the times, and in B2B, so much less common. I wonder if that's a new tactic.
Maybe. I think there was certainly there was particularly that they wanted to get more men, but the market for this actually was primarily women. But so you see what I mean? So there's an introduction, and if you don't engage, like there was a lot more mid-funnel like this, but this is a good example of that kind of engagement content. It's still kind of call to action. You can still go and book now, but there were many like testimonials. Now, if I did this testimonial as the first touch, and we did, and I'm sure to some extent it was fine and good, but it's not something necessarily qualifying the right people. Like, someone might be like, okay, I want a holiday, and okay, these people do a good holiday, and they click through and they're like, oh, I'm not single. Well, this has done the filtering, okay? This has done a lot of that filtering because they're really relating to the single bit. It says it's for 30, 40 something solos who are going to travel solo, So this has done a lot of filtering. And then the doubling down happens with, the testimonial stuff. Like this would be not necessarily a bad cold ad, but it's having a half dozen testimonials like that is one really nice way to go and retarget them. And then actually, just because it's interesting, this one was for people abandoning the cart, and it was basically, we called it like an FAQ ad. Right, I'm going to tell you something interesting on the numbers. Our cold funnel, which had a lot of spend, was a 1 times return on ad spend. Most people would say that sucks. I defended sustaining that for years, because the 1x return on ad spend was the cost of filling the funnel. At this level, it was substantially higher, and the hot campaign did not spend much, okay? This spent something in the low tens per day, and similar ones like it. And it had a return on ad spend of like 3,000-4,000 or something ridiculous, okay? So how do you judge this? You don't judge. You can judge, and I could argue lots of reasons why you should judge in certain cases, but you should judge the overall funnel return on ad spend when all those pieces flowing are in place, okay? And the blended average was 7 times. It was 13 times for a couple of years, but over the entire period in the late 2010s was 7 or 8 times return on ad spend blended. Okay. So a lot of people go, 1x return on ad spend sucks. It's like, no, you're actually acquiring people for dead cheap. And that's not even using video. Okay. You get another level of improvement on video. I can briefly give you a couple of cool examples. I'll just keep this short because I know I've made the point.
So just like a question though on the types of creatives, testimonials came up a lot. That blog post is kind of like a case study. I think we see that mixed a lot in B2B as well, where you want to have something about your product, you want to have something about the problem, you want to have some real customer stories, which actually never get old if you think about it, right? Because you've got each customer has a different and unique use case of your product. So you're really expanding out the storyline. Is that kind of the classic mix? Did I miss anything?
The kind of things that work are going to be well established. I think the hill I want to wave a flag from is thinking about delivery and thinking about the different states a person goes through. Okay, you could be the biggest fan of something in the world. Like if you just think for a moment, I don't know what it is. It might be a clothes brand. It might be a film or whatever. Right, whatever, something you might identify very strongly with. Okay, that journey, it wasn't like a light bulb switch where you just became the biggest fan. It might have happened quickly, but there was a chain of behaviors, probably very subconscious, and it started with you being in a state of you didn't know about it at all. Okay, you weren't born knowing about Radiohead or something. Okay, and then in fact, Radiohead's a fun example because for me it was like I'd gone from not knowing at all, and then I know about Radiohead and I've listened to it, and I'm not a mega fan, but I kind of had to go through the listening to it to then get to the next bit of going, oh my God, actually, okay, I'm starting to see it. And then becoming like, I identify that this is the best band in the world. That's me in the 2000s. Okay. So there's a state of behaviors, maybe the same for certain clothes or style. You tried something out and then you got a compliment and then you wore the rest. So there is this kind of amping up. And I think my point is there are ways your delivery can actually facilitate that very affordably and actually therefore increase the receptiveness over some time. Okay, but the fuel is budget, content, and I guess time. And so there are ways that you can engineer that increasing appreciation at reasonably low spends, rather than what I think a lot of advertisers do. And I'm going to be brutal simplification. There's a lot of great advertisers, certainly in the last 5-6 years, there's a lot of people who have lots of good original ways of thinking about this. But I've kind of always been able to fall back or certainly start with this kind of thinking, because the way attention works is universal and people do ease into things, and it just helps stick. So
we're at very close to time, so
we are.
Thank you, Tom. It's been amazing to go through this, and equally looking into also how people can start to engage a little bit better with how they're running ads. I think it's quite a problem point most people have, because like you say, 1x return. I mean, some people are seeing a lot less than that in B2B, right? For that first layer of cold. And it's important to note that actually it's all about what you do with them further down the line. You are just warming up the funnel. It's not you can't just do this cold to paid straight away. It's not possible anymore. So no, I think it's really important to see. Melody, did you have any key takeaways we should relay, and then we can sign off?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. You covered so much ground and really in detail, breaking down the ads that way. I think it's important to kind of zoom out for anyone who's running or thinking of running ads and use that framework of cold to warm to hot and the kind of creative variations needed in each of them. So key takeaways for me are like the first 15 seconds of your ad kind of determine your funnel's fate. If you don't have that memory from them or that attention initially, you're not going to get it. So until you win that, don't try and move them down to the next step. Also, retargeting doesn't have to be super, super complex. Some like a good mix of creatives from testimonials, case studies, and just going deeper down, maybe in the background view of the product, slowly getting them to where you want them to get to. And finally, I think you don't need that many creatives. You should test, but you don't have to test a huge amount because you end up
Find the winners and look after them. That's yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So true. Thank you so much for joining, Tom. Next week, if you join us on Thursday, we're going to go live with Reese Mohin. He's going to talk to you all about A/B testing, what to experiment with, what not to experiment with. And he's got this whole framework of going about it that I'd never seen before. Basically, he's like, don't waste time on all these micro tests. So it's going to be a good one.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. And yeah, we'll catch you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week. And
Thank
Tom's
you.
link's in the channel as well. So if you want to reach out to Tom directly, please do. Yeah, thanks for your time, Tom.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.